Well, Tilden, my friend Tilden, what a delight to have you with us here on this tropical island of Newfoundland. And you have an unruly group of Newfoundlanders before you, and it's probably good that you're not physically here because your safety will be compromised with the likes of these people. You realize that, right? So it's good to get just two more coming in. Frank and his wife come in and join us. We're just getting started. So Tilden, on behalf of Dr. Rick Singleton, the Provost of Queen's College, I welcome you to our spiritual guidance program that they're just launching, and what a privilege for us to have you with us. So I want to thank you, Tilden, for making this time possible and coming to join us. For those of you who don't know, Tilden is an Episcopal priest, and he's the founder of the Shalem Institute for Spiritual Formation in Washington, D.C. Tilden, along with other spiritual teachers of our time, like Richard Rohr and Thomas Keating, are all founding people in contemplative movements in North America. And there is a contemplative movement emerging. And what we recognize, whatever our future of our church is going to be, it will be contemplative in nature as it continues in this process. So Tilden, on behalf of the class and our visitors who are with us today, thank you. And the floor is yours.
Well, it's so good to be with you all. This pioneering class at Queen's College in spiritual formation. It looks like you're of more mature years, and maybe you're catching up on what the church did not offer in earlier times.
Right.
Yeah, we can all catch up with what is called for at this moment in history. Mm-hmm. I'm going to invite you to begin with a little contemplative prayer practice that allow us to taste the beginning of contemplative presence, and then I will just continue to talk to you for a while, and we'll have some good dialogue time after that. So let me ask you to let your bodies be in some way that they are both relaxed and alert at the same time. Take a very slow breath in and hold it without closing your throat. And as you exhale, just let any place in your body that has tension, anxiety, pain, just try to relax in the middle of that. Or rather, stop trying, just relax. Just let it all be. And a couple of more times, that very slow in breath. Hold it briefly, and then just open your lips very slightly to slow down your exhalation as that deep relaxation in your body is allowed to happen. On your next slow breath in, hold it again and open your lips slightly and have that long out breath. This time, notice any place in your mind that's anxious, any place that is damned, spiritual energy that wants to flow through you. That out breath, just let that anxiety dissolve. Do that several more times. Now just let yourself be in a simple, open presence. Everything is just what it is in this moment, in the Gracious One. Okay. What I have to say to you will be subjective, reflecting my own spiritual experience and yearning and contemplative theological views. In our dialogue time afterwards, you're very welcome to question anything I've said, as well as augment whatever I say from your own awareness. I believe each of us is on a unique spiritual journey for a whole lifetime, although always overlapping with other people's spiritual journeys. I think we each need to absorb what we hear in ways that enliven our personal sense of deep reality at this point in our lives, this point in our spiritual journey, which give us more than we bear at a given moment. I'm going to offer you a way of looking at three different inner places from which we listening from our egos, our minds, and our spiritual hearts. My main focus will be on the spiritual heart, because the heart is where the veil is thinnest between us and the indwelling spirit, as seen in Christian and some other contemplative traditions. It's also a neglected, vital center in us that's being uncovered today in this worldwide contemplative reawakening in the church and the world, which you and I both are part of. In the Bible, we find many references to the spiritual heart, and I'll just mention three little ones that I think are relevant for this time. The first is Psalm 51:6, where we read, "You desire truth in the inward being, Therefore, teach me wisdom in my secret heart. Second, in Proverbs 4:23, we hear, above all else, guard your heart, for from it flow the springs of life. And finally, we hear Jesus proclaim, blessed are the pure in heart, they shall see God. One way of interpreting that seeing as receive, as sees. My personal journey in realizing the spiritual heart as the deepest center of my consciousness, of course, began long ago with a restless desire to uncover a deeper place in me, a more foundational place from which I sensed I was meant to live. In hindsight, I believe that burning desire was the mysterious Holy One's desire, living, coaching me, drawing out my own desire. That open, liberating place I identify as my spiritual heart. And when I'm graced to be in my spiritual heart, my restlessness ceases. I find a sense of true home. I found that it's not a private home. It's an inclusive one, where in graced moments, very graced moments, all creation shows itself flowing together from the same divine wellspring. And I'm living for them in the spiritual heart, the transforming, creative love of that wellspring more easily flows through me in my daily living. Our heart, open to God's Spirit wanting to draw us through that door. In exchange for leaving behind everything we cling to, except for our open trust in divine love's gracious presence. That letting go is a lifetime process, never completed, given our human condition. But each graced letting go leaves us a little lighter, a little more aware that our deepest identity, not in our egoic sense of self, but in our self in God, in the great mysterious love whose energy flows through us. My commitment now is to live as often as I can from this vibrant home, to live grounded in it amidst all the forces within me and without that daily draw me away from that home. Jerry May, the psychiatrist who unfortunately prematurely died a few years ago, psychiatrist in our staff, once said that when he woke up in the morning, the first thing he did was ask God to remind him of his presence, because he wasn't going to remember. So he sort of gave God some responsibility for this, as well as ourselves. even simply desiring to live from this intimate, boundaryless home keeps a hopefulness alive in me during those times it's hidden during the day, and I've fallen into a narrow, separated from God, alone, doing it all myself, sense of self. The home of the spiritual heart, I believe, belongs to us all. However hidden or unnamed or differently named by us it may be. The spiritual heart is more than most of us have been culturally conditioned to understand by that word, heart. We usually understand that the heart is the seat of our affections and our will. But as our spiritual heart, it's also the seat of our deepest awareness, contemplative awareness. The spiritual heart includes our God-given capacity for direct, intuitive awareness of deep reality just as it is. The spiritual heart, everything is realized to be mutually indwelling, not just externally related, mutually indwelling. Everything is mutually belonging in the fullest sense. We begin to sense ourselves not as outsiders to what appears, but as insiders. We're not ultimately separated from whatever appears. We're intimately connected. There's a loving wholeness through all the differences, reflecting the loving wholeness that God is. As creatures shaped in the image of God, we're capable of such awareness. As images of God, we share the divine DNA. The Holy Spirit's energy flows through us, however dammed up it may be when we've lost heart presence and our fears and grasping willfulness. At the open door of the heart, thought, worries, and grasping are left behind. We're unchained from ego and mind dominance. We find ourselves in the open spaciousness before our mind and ego become active, a place that isn't even identified in much human experience, even when we're in it. Even not holding back or defending anything. We get the quality of fearless confidence because our fearful, overprotective, fragile ego is in abeyance. If grace takes us into the heart's depths, we may sense a compassion in us that is more than our own. A radiant love flowing through us from our creation. Now, this is different from the mind's way of knowing. The mind knows through the filter of its conditioned categories that outside what it sees through concepts and images. heart's way of direct and inclusive knowing and provide a larger ground for the mind or way or rational imagine including capacity to recognize and resist ways of doing that. However, it becomes the ultimate place for us for knowing reality. We believe the mind's influence is as close as it can get to what's real. Then I believe that we have overstepped the thinking mind's capacity. Concepts that easily become idols that can shrink reality to what those concepts can contain. Instead, we can value our mind's creations as helpful insights that can point us to deep reality rather than capture it. Such pointing is most in touch with the spiritual heart when the mind produces spiritual poetry. Just think for the moment what you heard or even created that you would call it coming from your spiritual heart. That's where the veil is thinnest between the mind and the heart. That's where region as poetry. Most of the mind pointing, merging into the heart's actual presence.
Corey's gone. Is Corey making another crack?
And in the Psalms, of course, too, at least in some of the Psalms, that kind of poetry, especially one like Psalm 139, this draws us right to that heart space. It includes a way of reading scripture too, as if you've been introduced to Lectio Divina. You know that's one way of moving into scripture with and from and for the spiritual heart. Okay, we can listen from a third place besides the mind and the spiritual heart. That is our egoic self. Some would call that the false self or an illusionary self when it takes on more than it can bear. This is the conditioned personality dimension of our nature. And I think it's a gift of God also, because it helps enable our basic functioning, our relationships, and our sexual pleasure in life. However, when we identify with the dimension of self as our ultimate identity, then we can become dominated by its often fearful, control-seeking drives. Those drives can skew our vision of the world and limit our freedom for self and God-centeredness and the on-target, loving, creative actions that flow from that center. When our ego identity takes on ultimate importance, we filter what we hear and say through its narrow self-centeredness. We could say, as one contemplative guide once told me, that our ego is a confused and overprotective friend who needs to be recognized. Heaven is nice. Sometimes we need to just pat it on the head and say, "Thank you for sharing." And then, this identity takes on our core being in the image of God. Is an individually unique shaping of divine creative love, however hidden by illusion, confusion, and the misuse of human freedom. In Christian contemplative tradition, this identity is what is seen in Jesus Christ and what he invites us to realize through the Spirit's empowerment in John's version of the gospel. In that realization, we find ourselves sharing something of the mind and heart of Christ, his intimacy with Abba. Moved in his mind are words that come. So awareness itself is the words. The place for Abba is beyond naming and yet closer to us than our breath. And that realization, we're converted to a deeper way of listening, seeing, and being. Over time, as we're ready and graced, we're able to relinquish much of what impedes the way of creative love in us. We dedicate ourselves to collaborating with capital L's overflow into the world's life in all the ways that we're called at a given time. Being in spiritual community, as I'm sure we all know, in community with others who can support this way of being is vital, especially in a dominant culture that lives much more from an ego sense of ultimate personal identity rather than from our deeper identity shown us in the spiritual heart. I think the yearning for that kind of community I see showing itself in Shalem groups over and over again, the great relief they feel to be with people who they can connect with beyond the personality level as well as at the personality level. The people who share that sense of a deeper identity in God where they all belong together beyond the trying. It's just a given. It's not a concocted community. It's not an engineered community. It's a living organic community, shared discipleship at its deepest. As our spiritual journey proceeds in grace and willingness, we can find our egos and minds more and more free to be vessels of the heart's loving light, rather than displacers of the heart. We take the communion realized and the callings heard into daily life, letting God's joy, wisdom, and love flow through us, however erratically, in our human condition. I mentioned that communion and those callings, those are the two basic ways that St. Gregory of Nyssa, one of the early church elders, spoke of our basic human vocation. Our first purpose is here and in itself communing in God, with God, and one another in God's creation. That sheer appreciative and in itself communing And the second calling is the overflow of that heart communing together into the world's needs and ways of constructing life. And the heart, we also remain open to receiving or life-giving gifts through others. Again, it's not just that direct communication coming in solitude with God. It's that the way that someone else has said, even unbeknownst to them, that has been a flashcard, divine presence to you. That's been the word you need to hear to come through them for you. Sometimes in church committee meetings, the person you might least expect to have that word for you. Someone who maybe causes a lot of trouble and doesn't seem to be with it in any way, shape, or form. Suddenly, a space opens in them and they say something, and everyone's mouth drops open, and that's the word that needed to be heard in that moment. So, in a sense, we're all equal vessels of the Spirit. It's all of it has its way of showing up when needed. And those forgetful, agitated, and willful, sinful times, I think we can seek and accept the forgiving and encouraging love and image of God, a dignity that is ours as we finally turn to God's gracious presence in and around us, of our completeness, of our ongoing evolution. The second phrase of the Lord's Prayer, your kingdom come, your will be done, something that moves toward the future, the forward. It's not just looking backwards. It's something in the present that's restless for the more of God, the more of the fullness that in the end when Christ fills all things. Contemplative practice helps us remember and embrace our deepest identity in the image of God. They can leave us more available to God's grace and to an awareness of mutual belonging and co-responsibility for life. One vital contemplative practice through all that happens in the day, I have found, including through spiritual direction sessions, if you're in spiritual direction, either as a directee or director, is to simply lean back again and again, back behind that ego identity into that receptive, spacious, spiritual heart, and open there whatever is happening in the moment to God. Open to the radiant love that is the depth of all things. Let me end this talk by returning to the little contemplative practice with which we began and take another step. A step that might help us come closer to the threshold of the spiritual heart. The threshold is as far as a practice can take us. Whatever may happen further is not in our hands. So again, attention to your body's place in your prayer where it's relaxed, alert at the same time. Might want to close your eyes. If it's comfortable for you, you might want to open your palms on your knees or one in each other. It's a way of letting your body, your hands show a certain openness in the way you would like your mind to show such openness. Take one of those relaxing, slow, deep breaths in from deep down. Your lips slightly open, again letting any place of tension in your body relax with your out breath, letting the energy flow freely again. And on the next long breath in, let yourself release that breath in relation to your mind's anxiety or grasping pressure. Just let it open like that sea of reeds in which the Israelis reached that place of open freedom without fear and willingness to move forward. Letting that free flow of God's God-given liberating energy that may be dammed up, just flowing openly again. Now, notice any ego sense of yourself, any little self-protective image lurking in the background of your consciousness. That little self-centeredness that influences so much of our understanding and action. Just notice it neutrally, and now energetically move behind that clinging little self-image. Move to where it's very spacious and open. To remain in that spaciousness that exists before your thoughts rise. It's always there between your thoughts. Just open yourself to the intimate beloved in the heart of that spaciousness. Just rest in that gracious presence for a few minutes now, heart to heart with the love that enfolds you, mutually indwelling. Now gently open your eyes. Simply accept whatever happened in that time just as it is. Trust that God's Spirit is hiddenly at work in you through whatever happens. If you sense in yourself a fervent desire to live from God's mysterious loving light in you, consider that desire to be a reflection of God's desire in you, longing for you to realize and reflect that dark radiance in your life. So what would it be like for you to be with someone, perhaps as a spiritual director or as a directee, to be present and listening from your spiritual heart as you were just listening? What would it be like to sit with someone present to the gracious one in your heart and present heart to heart with that person, listening for the loving Spirit's movements together? The purity of spiritual direction moments, I think that's where we're living. And you could say that's when we're at our truest self-presence in any kind of relationship. You might want to have a little homework for this next week from this little talk of mine. Just try to pay attention during the day to from where you are listening and responding. From your sort of egoic self? Is it from your mind's thinking? Is it from your spiritual heart's inclusive, open presence? Just see during the day and maybe do a little journaling at the end of the day about what it was like to pay attention to where you're coming from. I suggest you do that without judgment. Just notice you're coming from your ego self, just a little smile of recognition. No, that's the way it is. It's possible to notice when you've lost your presence to your spiritual heart. Just knowing you're not in that space itself is of great value, because you know there's somewhere else to be. Your ego and your mind, then you're really trapped. There is. But if there's another freer, truer place, then there's more hope for not only for you personally, I think, and whoever you're with, but the more people know of that place and care about what the Spirit is drawing them toward, I think the world becomes a better place. That's so much what we're experiencing, I think, right now in my country, politically experiencing, shows so much power of that ego presence to shape our whole structured collective societal life. So what we're talking about in terms of contemplative awareness, it's not just a private affair that affects us and a few other people, but finally it can be the leaven and the lump of human collective life, of parish life, church life, of life. And that's the hardest place, maybe. But that then says we're talking about a societal revolution as well as a personal revolution. There's one parish in Episcopal parish in Gainesville, Florida, Gainesville, Georgia. Grace Church, a large church, whose pastor is a Shalem graduate, Stuart Higginbottom. And if you go onto their website, Grace Episcopal Church, Gainesville, Georgia, you might see some ways they've been evolving in the last few years, where they decided to take spiritual formation as the heart of their life together, contemplative spiritual formation. And they've even launched a bicentennial capital fund drive as a contemplative capital fund drive. And they have reorganized every group meeting there to reflect kind of discerning, listening, open presence, and find the spiritual heart, if you will. And they're calling it the need for a contemplative reformation, which we've lost, as Richard Rohr said about 500 years ago, in terms of Christian standing and practice. As the mind has been kept the center and feelings, but not the awareness of the spiritual heart. So with that, I'm going to stop. I could talk longer than I thought I would. So I have time for everyone who wants to ask. Let me, our director of online programming, to come in with me, because I am hard of hearing and just want to make sure I can hear you speaking. If I can't, she'll translate for me. So it's just me. Let me open the door.
Did you write down that church class?
Yeah, Grace Church in Gainesville.
Okay. This is Ruth Taylor, Director of Online
Hello.
Programming. And
First
knowledge, I don't know. She set everything up for us from this end, and there's an enormously essential staff person at Shalem.
It's wonderful to be with your left hand. I feel like very spiritual. It feels lovely in the presence to be right here.
So Tilden, thank you for that, and we love you for that. So for the class, and Ruth, welcome to our little circle we got going on here. And and Ruth's job is to translate from Newfoundlandese to Americans. So that's what you're going to do, is it? So we're going to take a few minutes now, and please, this is your opportunity to ask Tilden anything out of his presentation, especially with reference to ego, mind, and spiritual heart. Very, very important presentation, but also anything with how that might be resonating with your own sense of spiritual journey also. So this is your once in a lifetime opportunity.
I'd like to ask a question. With the millennials saying they're spiritual, are they really wondering, I'm wondering if they're looking for the contemplative spiritual formation? There's so many people out there who say they're spiritual, but they're not religious. But are they deeply looking for spiritual formation?
What's the question? I heard the words. What's the question?
So, spiritual but not religious.
Yeah.
Hearing a lot of it, and so the question is for those who are identifying as spiritual but not religious. What's the question? Can you repeat it?
I'm just wondering if they may be instinctively looking for contemplative spiritual formation in their lives.
Absolutely, yes, I hear you, and they can pick it up these days in so many ways. Mindfulness kinds of. There's a lot of secular and therapeutic uses of contemplative practice. There's a whole big book out now on someone who's a kind of specialist in seeing what's going on all over the country and all over the world. And religious contemplative reawakening has, a special depth dimension to it, because it's not just for egoic functional purposes. It's for opening up that deepest trusted reality that we call God's Spirit in us and among us. And that takes it a step, in, if you will, in background understanding than many people are going with contemplative practices. But certainly, I think potentially there, with that person saying they're looking for, they're spiritual but not religious, it is that they're sensing what they have tasted as religious has lacked that depth, so to speak. Has lost a sense of the spiritual heart as something that's taught from preschool onward in church school. It's not seen as a lifetime series of practices and community that is geared toward the fullest way, interiorly and exteriorly, life can be lived. And I think there's an enormous evangelical potential there if we can, as is happening, for example, at the church in Georgia, where I think that there was, in that sense, people within the church who were seeing and really being open to that. Yes. And the way liturgy was done, and the way committees met and how they met, and the constant invitation to listen, to respond, to see, to act from the spiritual heart place. I think that has drawn in that particular church 200 more people in the first couple of years that they turned in this direction. So I think as there are people within the church who can, and their leadership are turned in this direction, I think we can be bridges for them finding that what that restlessness is in them and their spiritual search connect with, for example, Jesus' restlessness when he was not turned to his intimate, open spiritual heart awareness of God and of people, of life in general. And if Jesus can be portrayed as this phenomenal, great, God-given, incarnate mystic, Jesus becomes something quite different. It's not something that is an intellectual or emotional connection only. It's something that's like in John's Gospel, Jesus yearns to have his followers discover with the Spirit's empowerment is coming to them, that they too can understand what he's saying when it says, I'm in you and you are in me and I am in God. That insideness that is awakened in the spiritual heart, that creates a different kind of church, of congregation, of the good works flow from something that is the communing thing that I quoted Gregory of Nyssa as saying, you know, that first calling of our human nature is for this deep, intimate communing with all that is in God. And I'll stop there. That's more than enough.
All right, thank you. Go ahead.
I'd like to make a comment along with the question. Coming from an age and a space and a lifestyle that we are in, or I'm in right now, where contemplative prayer and practice was not the practice, not normal. Well, you know, like prayer life was different. And so I find it difficult to do a contemplative prayer. So does it get any easier with practice? How long is it going to take? And how do we recognize, like how can I recognize when I have a good contemplative practice, prayer, spiritual life going on? Like, is there a sort of like, no, I know not a checklist, but sort of like a guide that you can say, okay, I finally got it, sort of thing. Or because I'll be honest, like sometimes in the contemplative, I get so relaxed, all of a sudden I won't dare say I was asleep, but I can zone out totally, so that besides not hearing anything going on, like somebody rustling a paper or making a cough or something like that, I'm not even sure then if I heard anything at all. So is it that I just went totally out of it, or is that a part of the contemplative that I'm supposed to be listening for what should be there, or what I'm hoping is there, or the Spirit is there? Is that a part of the listening, the deep listening to see what he's saying to me, or what?
You might notice right now where that question is coming from inside of you.
Okay. Well, I don't notice, so you better tell me.
That's the mind's reflection on
Okay.
being present and contemplative prayer.
Yeah.
And contemplative openness. And the mind wants to get in on it. You know,
Yeah.
It wants to go right. It wants to know when something good is happening and when it's not. And this is very classic in contemplative practice, and what happens with our minds trying to figure out what is this about, and you know, am I doing it right, and so forth. Yeah. It might help to sense that bringing your desire for your deepest self in God, when you enter that practice time, feeling that having that desire in you for whatever it is that God wants, so to speak. That desire is enough. That desire is enough to bring to the practice. And whatever happens in the practice, you can trust that the hidden work of God is going on. In Jewish tradition, there's even a tradition that says when you're your thoughts are coming up. The thoughts that are coming because they need a blessing. That particular thought needs a blessing, so to speak. Way of incorporating it and letting it go. But there's really no measurement but the aliveness of your desire and your willingness to let happen what happens, and over time beginning to become aware that everything that's there is happening in God, and that I forgot what I was going to say there. That even if there seems to your mind's thinking nothing there, the nothing itself is full of God's energy and spirit. We're just not used to calling nothingness something.
Thank you.
You're not used to identifying, what's there, which seems like nothing to the mind, is in fact an open spaciousness in which there is room for the spirit to do its own mysterious work, which you don't have to know, which you don't have to be aware of. And maybe it's even better that you're not aware of it, because you might be
Scared to death.
fearful, terrified. Gotta give you what you're ready for at a given time. Remember I said in my talk that your practice can bring you to the threshold of this spiritual heart. Where you just leave yourself as vulnerable and open as possible to what's given, and treat everything as just something that's there. It's just what it is. It's not to be judged as good or bad. It's just there. It's just what it is. It comes, it goes. But you're giving space for the spirit to work. And there may be nothing, no great exciting bells and whistles that ever show themselves. For some great mystics, that never happened. And yet there was an awareness that evolved over time, because that spiritual heart space, as I said, belongs to everyone, even when it's not identified. And everyone is in, except maybe totally out of it people, everyone has the capacity for being in heart, and they don't know when they've been there because they haven't, their mind has not treated it as a reality.
Right.
That's different from your mind's thinking or feeling. So it's something that is going to show itself in different ways, and probably does during the day, but you haven't yet become aware of it. Those moments of just open presence where the sunset grabs you, grab the sunset. Something comes to you that you have not reached for, but has just happened. You're looking at an icon of Jesus, like the Sinai Christ icon, which is available online. Very powerful 6th century face-on connection with Jesus, where you don't try to look for something in the eyes of Jesus. You let those eyes look at you, look through you. And that collapses the space between you. There's nothing left. You are mutually indwelling. So you let go of the mind's grasping for anything. And you just let come what comes. And let it go, let it be, let it be. Become comfortable with letting be. Receptive time, no matter what's there. There's no good content, there's no bad content. God is at work in it regardless. And it can be very boring to our minds many times. We're very questionable. Is this worth the time? Over time, if you really distinguish your spiritual heart space as your deepest faculty of awareness and knowing, even if it's just a 2-second glimpse, it's enough to show you, hey, there's the door is open, just a crack, just enough. I'm there. Draws me forward, draws me toward it. I didn't have to do the drawing. That's all you can do is have that vulnerable, receptive presence. And your desire in that, the desire showing itself, the fire of that desire. It burns everything that is in the way of that awareness. Burns it up, and leaves you freer and freer for at least 3 times for glimpses of true being in God, God's true being in you. Seldom mystics say it's this paradox both ways. God is in you, you are in God. You can't give up the paradox. You can't say that God is here and you're there. You can't say that it's all just one. It's both 1 and 2 at the same time. That's the contemplative paradox that the spiritual heart teaches, so to speak. You have that inclusive. Everything is together. Everything is mutually indwelling. And there's something distinctive about your place in that. But in those purest moments, it's a mutual indwelling where you don't protect a separate space. You just let yourself be in that collective reality, that mutual indwelling, mutual belonging. Does that make any sense?
Thank you. Yes,
Absolutely.
thank you.
All right, any other questions? Don?
This is a follow-up to your question on that, and also a follow-up to what you just said, right?
Speak up, Don.
Okay. This is on page 14 in your book, Living in the Presence, and you say, we need to pray for a steady trust that is not dependent on either our feelings or our concepts. God must be reflected in these, but not fully revealed. And one of the problems that we see, or at least I and I think some others seem to be having, is that when we go down beyond, or try to get beyond, our own egos in our own mind, to that resting place, to that deeper consciousness, we're afraid to let go of the control. I think you call it being vulnerable to the presence of God. There's a bit of a fear of allowing ourselves to lose that control.
Right.
And getting past that is very difficult, I think.
To me, it's helpful to recognize where that fear is coming from. You know, that's an ego fear. Part of your job is to protect you from anything that might be threatening. And if you recognize that as where it's coming from, it helps to keep it in its place, so to speak. Oh yes, there's that fear, but that's not the last word. There's that willingness to see that, to smile at that, and to let go. You think about it, every night of your life, you're letting go, or you couldn't go to sleep, right? And probably we all have many of us have a flash of fear at letting go. And so we stay awake. But then we're eventually, the tiredness takes us over and we have to let go. But still, it's really worth remembering that we can't get away from letting go every day of our lives, or else we'll die without sleep. When you have no control whatsoever, and for that every night, who knows what God is up to during the night and what the Spirit is doing, what other spirits are doing. We trust that because we have to. But I certainly understand that fear is very, very, very common. it's built into us because that's what the ego's job is meant to be, but the ego is kind of blind, so to speak. It doesn't know when properly to be fearful and when it needs to be patted on the head and just let go. I don't know that how does that say anything to you?
I'll sleep good tonight.
Well,
It's a trust all night long.
yeah. Now, Tilden, we're an hour and 10 minutes now. Do you have time for maybe one more question, or how are you doing? How are you doing, Tilden?
I'm fine.
Are you? Maybe one more question.
It's not, I don't have a question. It's just an observation that sort of happened. Because I've been hearing you've got to continually practice the contemplative life in order to get it mastered. That's the wrong place to come from. What just kind of filtered into the heart was, I don't have to practice, I just have to answer the invitation. And the invitation that says, come. And that just totally reframed my attempt at contemplative practice, because it's not a practice, it's an invitation from the divine presence that's there for all of us to commune with. And if nothing else comes out of this today, that's reframed for me something that needed to be reframed, because it left my head from practice into my heart from invitation. And that's good. And thank you.
I thank you for giving everyone that insight that connects with what I meant by desire, being recognized as God's desire in you, God's invitation in you. God's not letting you off the hook by just staying in a very narrow ego life world, but has more in mind for you. Jesus has more in mind for us. It's coming from not from some place of guilt, or having to do something, or it's not from law. From this free place, this good news place that the spiritual heart is. That the invitation is that spiritual heart.
Frank, go ahead, Frank.
Okay. I'm a retired Anglican priest.
Speak up, Frank.
I'm a retired Anglican priest. And one of the things now, I have more time for reading and thinking, but it's getting a spirit. There seems to be a gap between the theology in my head and the spirituality, the practice of spirituality, getting new ways to just give you new ways to pray. For example, some of the things some of my theology doesn't fit with the traditional form of prayer, and I struggle in there between my ideas of God, my belief about God, and prayer life. And I was just wondering, is that normal as you age?
Well, so much of theological, conceptual, complex theological work of the last centuries has come from the rational minds attempt to match concepts with concepts. And if you think, of the origin of theology, it's the purest theology is that which comes from a person's awareness in the spiritual heart, and mind wanting to get in on that and creating, interpreting words and so forth that give a sense of what that awareness shows us. But, that's, again, at the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, as much has been written about, there became such a focus on the rational mind's correct understanding of what the gospel is about, that it lost its ground in the spiritual heart. And so naturally, a spiritual heart, often public theology, so to speak, that grows out of that. And if it's not that, then our interpretations of the traditional theology become affected by what those words mean for us. Once when I was several months in a very intense contemplative residential practice and went to an Ignatian 8-day retreat after that, and began reading a lot of mystical literature, I was aware that the great mystical theologians, such as in the early church, some of the early church fathers, and the early desert mothers and fathers who really spoke of the importance of letting the mind sink to the heart. Their theology grew out of their contemplative heart awareness. Mm-hmm. When theologians later centuries, when became a much more intellectualized, so to speak, church, that base was lost, and so there is this sense of, what does that mean anymore that I had learned theologically? I personally have been able to reinterpret the way that I feel orthodox, as Richard Rohr says, it's a kind of alternate orthodoxy that contemplative awareness draws out. A different level of understanding and meaning. We're all theologians the moment we begin reflecting on our experience and the experience of the world. We're giving interpretive words to what's there. This is where I think, contemplative poetry becomes so helpful, because like John, who could be more orthodox than John of the Cross or Thomas Aquinas, who you probably remember after his phenomenal, fantastic, profound writings, bringing in Greek philosophy as well. He said, after some particular moment of awakening awareness, he said, all my theological writing is like straw. And he never again wrote. Theology, though, I think good contemplatives can't keep writing theology, but it sort of shifts the interpretation of what those words mean. What does Christ mean as Savior? The instructions that we have, as well as seeing the contributions of that theology to helping us be in touch with the full range of experience. One contemporary theologian some decades ago said that one purpose of theology is to protect the mystery of God. That would say then that heresy, I'm saying this, he didn't say that, heresy would be anything that narrows the gospel down, the truth down to less than it is. It's heretical. So what protects the full mystery of God in our theological works? What protects the mystery that the mind has as its last word? Because the mind can't get its mind around the whole thing, as the contemplative heart, in a sense, is given the capacity to touch that which is there before the words,
Right.
before things get chopped up into words, and have this and that concepts in opposition to each other, a connection with each other. That's the mind's gift that does that, but it's not the deepest place spiritually. And that place needs all kinds of practices and awakening and trust. That's there. Well, we're being invited to touch the deepest good news that's in us and let it flow over into the world's life in justice and peace and caring for the neighbor, all that goes with the social ministry of our lives.
Yes, thank you. I realize, that I think sometimes the heart knows more than the mind. You get that, there's a gut feeling that about things that get in your mind, and that's part of the struggle, I guess, in trying to discern the truths into which Jesus, the Spirit, is leading us, and growing with the Spirit and in the Spirit as we get new insights into what we believe to be true about God. But it's always a struggle for me, that I don't see traditional prayer, traditional intercessory prayer doesn't have the same impact in my life, in my prayer life, as it used to when I was in my younger days. I think I've grown into some sense of God's presence that I don't need to spend a lot of time interceding. I need more time thinking and being with, that kind of attitude.
Mm-hmm.
So that's. But I thank you for your thoughts. They were very good.
Thank you, Frank. Now, my friends, we're going to have to draw this to a close. Tilden, you're awesome. You're awesome.
Yeah, we agree.
Did you hear that? We love you, Tilden. Community. So this was.
God bless you all.
No,
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Ruth. We'll be in touch. Okay, God bless all. Thank you. Well, now, my friends, I'm just going to start my recording.